Hello, this is Brian from the Bad Manners Podcast. I'm going to be reacting to a video put out by Trigonometry titled Warren Smith on How Tribalism is Destroying Critical Thinking. This should be interesting, so let's get into it.
Which is why it's kind of impressive that the video you did about J.K. Rowling, with your help, actually could think. Because increasingly we see this now on the internet as well. It's like people are incapable of separating ideas from people, and the way that debates are now increasingly conducted. I mean, as we're sitting here recording this won't go out for a while, but there's literally some of America's most prominent journalists saying that they have micro penises online. And it seems to me like that, I mean, that's kind of a direct continuation of this, like where you no longer discuss any of the issues, and it's just you're on the wrong side, you're on the wrong side of history, you're the other, and what gets lost is the actual conversation.
This is simply a reflection of the fact that we have, at minimum, two strongly competing, mutually exclusive ideologies being represented by very large groups of people. On one end, of course, you have the people allied with the left, and then you have the people generally allied with the right. And because there is no consensus between them, the room for discussion is practically non-existent. So there is this sort of default to what is your identity? Because the assumption that is typically made is that if an opinion is coming from somebody on the left, that it is probably harmful to somebody on the right, and vice versa. So naturally, this outcome is to be expected because we are effectively in a sort of Cold War due to the inability to agree on anything at all.
And it's deeply offensive to people from the micro-penis community.
Absolutely.
I think it's largely, I've been working on this book that's coming out that kind of delves into this. I think it comes back to the laws of narrative and the fact that we can't separate the character from the narrative psychologically. It's impossible. I think it's largely because their narratives are built on their business is built on their claims. When you become wed to your ideas, that becomes your brand. Now you're defending your brand. So you're less likely to change your mind. And then it leads into these wars that we're seeing now. So that's, my approach is different because I don't find that to be, there's things that I feel strongly about still, right? But those are my first principles. That's not what we're seeing. We're seeing how the first principles manifest into politics. And frankly, politics is kind of boring to me compared to the deeper dynamics.
The deeper dynamics are more of an esoteric interest as far as the general population is concerned. The average person is going to be concerned with, satisfying those basic needs, and their mind is going to be engineered at making sure those are taken care of first. The deeper principles are a luxury to be considered once those have been taken care of. Well, politics, on the other hand, politics are a medium by which people attempt to engineer outcomes to problems they have. Those are going to be of more immediate interest to most people. Even more so when you consider that, again, we are currently locked in a struggle between two mutually opposing viewpoints, possibly more, that preclude any chance at meaningful cooperation. Instead, people begin to look at politics as a way to simply survive to some extent. When I say survive, it could be basic needs, but it could also just be looking after the perpetuation of your culture's traditions, beliefs, and practices.
Beneath all this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's one of the reasons we have had a lot of political guests on the show, but we've increasingly felt like that we want to space them out if having any of them at all. And I mean, when we started, our rule was we don't have politicians on the show. And then, you kind of, things are going on in the world. You want to hear some of their perspectives, whatever. But over time, you're definitely right that it kind of, you end up playing a totally different game, and it's not the game we want to play. And by the way, I think there is plenty of space, and you're demonstrating, I hope we're demonstrating it, for content, which is not about we're on this team or on this team, but more like we are adjudicating the issues that come up.
Notice that all three of the gentlemen seated at this table would generally be considered on the right. They are occupying a space that exists within a cultural consensus. The right is far more ideologically diverse than the left is. But at least within that diversity, they can have discussions and debate principles, ideas, solutions to problems, etc., because that cultural consensus and general understanding and sharing of the same set of values makes it conducive to productive outcomes. We are currently in an environment where you have a very large group of people on the other side that are not amenable to that in the slightest. So it is a case where the tribalism has to come first, because if you don't collectivize with people of like mind, then any notion of getting an opportunity to entertain those principles or those more intellectual pursuits will be crushed under the boot heel of that different ideology that has no tolerance for your particular perspective. The only thing they can tolerate is, of course, their own ideology and its adherents.
As we go, and we have some principles that guide us in that, but like a lot of people won't be able to tell what we think about an issue that comes up. They try to, but often they're surprised by that. And I think a lot of people find that very discombobulating because they just want you to be on their team.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. That's been an eye-opener as well for me. Yeah, there's been content creators where, because I do this format where I like looking at the dynamics of these interactions, and you're not going to win them all. Everyone is going to have ones that go well, and because we're wrong about certain things, and sometimes even when you're right, it's going to go poorly. It doesn't, just the nature of debates, and I don't even like thinking of myself as a debater. But I've noticed that as well, where like Tim Pool got really pissed at me because I disagreed with him on one video, and that I was like, whoa, that took me aback. And there is this sense, I've had a lot of people where there is this team dynamic where it's like, yeah, but you're supposed to be on our ideological team. But it's important to note, there's not a single person I'm going to agree with on everything. We were kind of referring to that.
Heated debate and discussion within the framework that makes up what you'd consider the right, that's not that big of a deal. It is important that anybody on the right makes it clear that despite said disagreements, you're still countrymen. Because in order for us to even have the luxury of continuing to have these heated debates amongst ourselves, we're going to have to survive. Because these values are not really shared by other groups. Those other groups could include Muslims. It can include, of course, leftists. It can even include cultures for which these sort of intellectual debates are not exactly conducive to their interests or just alien to them altogether. So it is natural that people are defaulting to the tribe first mentality just because they're coming at it from a more survival oriented perspective.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, one of the difficulties is if you play the team game, which I understand why people play because it's comfortable and there's lots of money to be made and friendships and, gatherings and all, there's lots of advantages, network advantages to being part of a thing. I don't think that's really compatible with having solid principles. And I'm not even that interested in it anymore, but like the Candace Owens situation.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's entirely incompatible either. I look at it as a sequential affair. If you need the tribal approach in order to survive, to create the outcome in which you can set about meaningfully pursuing your principles, then at least those principles have gained the ability to achieve some sort of reification into practice. But if you're trying to put the principles before the tribe, then it makes you susceptible to failing to survive. And in which case, it'll end up being some version of navel gazing because you'll be ineffectual in practice.
Is a very good example of this, where she's making claims about the fact that Erica Kirk killed her husband with the connivance of Egypt or Israel. It changes every day, right? And a lot of people on the right, on her team, are very quiet about it. which is, maybe she's your friend, whatever. You handle it whichever way you think. That's up to those people. But I just know that if someone on the left was saying, well, no, Charlie Kirk wasn't killed by the guy that we think he was killed by. Actually, he was killed by Erica Kirk. I mean, I think those people might have had something to say about it, right?
This isn't really an issue. It is natural for people to treat their perceived enemies differently than they would treat their perceived allies. Because it's to be assumed that if the enemy is doing it, they're doing it because it is in some way potentially harmful to your cause in one way or another. The intent is different. Now, if you look at somebody like Candace Owens doing it, despite the fact that she might be very loopy, her intent wouldn't be to harm the people generally adjacent to her in terms of general political leaning. So your approach to dealing with her would be considerably different. Her intent is something else. It's bizarre, but there's at least some reason to assume she's not trying to engineer some outcome that's harmful to you or people like you.
So you either have consistency of party loyalty or you have consistency of thought and ideas. And you can't have both sometimes, right?
Not to the absolute, because you're gonna disagree sometimes, for sure. For me, the way I approach it, if I'm being quiet about something, the way I would articulate is like, I have not seen adequate evidence to indicate that Erica Kirk killed Charlie Kirk. Like, that's how I would address it.
Yeah, I think that's
and
fair.
I would just leave it at that. Right. I don't know Candace.
But on my point, the point I'm making is something else, Warren. And again, I don't really particularly care about having a go at these people who are supposed to call Candace out or those people or whatever. I'm not that interested. I'm just making a broader point, which is if you are, let's say, on the right and someone on the left made these comments about Charlie Kirk, the response would be immediate and strong and thorough and probably vicious.
Yeah.
And yet when someone on your team does it, you kind of go, I think attacking Charlie Kirk's widow is wrong.
Yeah, that's going back to that. We can't separate the character from the narrative.
Right.
That's,
And I guess the point I'm trying to make is I don't think it's possible to play a team game while also being true to the facts.
Oh, no, it's absolutely possible. I mean, humans do this all the time. You can have a principle, and how you set about pursuing that principle in action can be modified to some extent on exactly who you're dealing with. You might show more compassion to a relative that violated a principle in terms of how you would discuss it with them, as opposed to somebody that had caused you past injustice. Same principle, you're still standing for it, you'll still argue for it, but you might not use the exact same means. So no, this isn't quite the issue that he's trying to present it as. And I also refer back to the fact that this whole issue of being able to sit around and defend principles consistently and all that, that's reserved for a framework that has a cultural consensus. Because then other people are going to be generally operating under similar assumptions, and therefore you'll be able to have meaningful debates that can actually result in some kind of functional outcome. When you have a system where the other side is not within your consensus, then there is little reason to believe that your application of principle to them should be quite the same.
Agree. I don't play team, even if it looks like it. I don't play team. I think Jordan Peterson was right to call, and this has always stayed with me, I don't like identity politics on the left or the right. Maybe it's because I was just listening to my favorite debate driving down here with Stephen Fry. I mean, it's one of the simple debate, but it's one of the most powerful. And that was the message. It's like, when does the left go too far? The right goes too far. I'm not going to, yes, and it goes deep to psychology, evolutionary psychology, why we band together in these ways, but it's a foolish game, I think.
It cannot be a foolish game because it is endemic to survival. People have and always will come together for the purposes of survival. And the tribalism is so strong because of that mutually exclusive competing ideology reality. So people are going to put their survival over their principle more often than not. I do find a certain nobility and honor in people that are willing to make a martyr of themselves in the pursuit of a principle over all else. But ultimately, at best, such an approach renders you to become a footnote of history. And large groups of people simply do not want to take that risk. Effectively, it's, especially in the context of leftists. Leftists are Machiavellian, and one of their notable features is, of course, making sure that they use your principles against you. So they'll leverage them in such a way that they are gaining advantage from it. And you might feel like you're gaining this luxury of, oh, I'm standing on my principles, and therefore what I'm doing is good. Meanwhile, the enemy is, rallying their forces and prepared to destroy whatever it is you stand for. So it creates a sort of friction in which, to what extent your principles exist, they are probably best reserved for practice within a framework in which you are surrounded by your countrymen or at least like-minded folk. Of course, some would argue that this in turn must make me hypocritical to some extent, because I would not extend the same courtesy to all people. But I remain steadfast in my belief that you do not treat your enemies with the same courtesy you would treat your allies. I regard such actions as foolish. But for those viewing it, your mileage may vary.
Well, one of the things that happens is I think, in the podcast and content creation YouTube space, what we're talking about, which is ideas, and politics, they get meshed together.
Politics are a means by which those ideas achieve reification. Despite the fact that reification is technically a logical fallacy, humans, via consensus, can attempt to come together and put those ideas into some kind of practice in society, and politics are the means by which that is accomplished. So there is no meaningful distinction between the two, because if an idea is simply something that is going to stay in your head and never be translated into reality, you must question the value of said idea in the first place.
And so you have people who are talking about ideas, and sometimes they're talking about politics, and we do this too. And then those two things come together, and I think it's quite confusing. It's like, are you talking about ideas or are you talking about politics? Because they're just different games. And I think a lot of the discrepancy comes from that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like the difference between the first principles and how those underlying dynamics versus how they manifest into politics. I mean, I agree with you on that for sure. Yeah.
I think part of the worry is when we talk about education is, because I used to be a teacher, so everyone can drink now. I mention it every
That's
episode.
right, yeah.
I like it. Warren's like, yeah, you do. But
where's your mum from again?
Venezuela. Anyway, 2 drinks. But one of the things that you do as a teacher is you disseminate information, give them information. Arguably, the most important part of teaching is not the information aspect of it. You're teaching skills.
Yeah.
So when I was a drama teacher, what you were doing is you were teaching skills to kids so they knew how to be creative. They knew how to structure and create improvisations, long-form improvisations, plays, how to be more realistic on stage, etc. What you're doing is teaching people how to think critically. The problem comes if we don't do that. These skills are not intuitive. They have to be learned.
That's interesting. Yes, because I think the recognition of logic is intuitive, but you're right, because this is going counter against what we were just describing about that tribal evolutionary impulse to band together for survival. And
it's interesting, again, you have 3 men sitting at this table, generally have a similar political alignment. They all, of course, agree that the development of critical thinking is important. Here's the thing. The development of critical thinking in the masses is a responsibility carried out by institutions. These institutions are downhill or downstream from culture. Now, people on the right would generally agree that critical thinking is an important skill to be developed. It's a cultural priority, and it's a practice that we would want to cultivate both in ourselves but for our posterity. In order to see through your cultural values to ensure that they disseminate through society, you must have cultural hegemony or homogeneity, ideally both. Within that hegemony, you'd be able to make sure those priorities move on. In this post-World War II consensus, with the introduction of ascending leftist ideology infiltrating with the long march through the institutions, critical thinking is in no way a priority of leftist ideology. It's not a concern of theirs. The individuals that actually come to critically think about their beliefs and still remain leftist, they are Machiavellians. And the individuals that do not sufficiently examine them, they just become useful idiots for those Machiavellians attempting to gain increased power. And you see this in that when they come into these institutions, critical thinking isn't the emphasis, it's leftist priorities, whether it be diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, or an endless catering to behaviors that would ensure those individuals are not incentivized to stray from what they've been demoralized with.
But yes, breaking away, pattern disruption is well, it's a pattern disruption. Most people aren't going to do it. The majority, I think about it like this: the majority of people are going to be like water. They're going to take the path of least resistance. It's easier to be foolish than wise. There's risk that comes with breaking away from the group. I sat down with Dr. Peterson. He described it as being the zebra with like orange stripes, right? Like the reason zebras blend in is because they all have the same stripes. White and black stripes aren't going to cause you to blend into the grass. You're blending to the herd. I think you are on to something there. That's what I'm trying to delve into with what I've been writing and trying to put it into to words.
Because when I look at some of these kids, and you look at some people who debate these kids on campuses, and you see the kids get angry and upset. And then invariably the comments on YouTube is like, oh, kid gets owned or whatever else. And I go, actually, I think we all now need to be a little bit more adult. I've been guilty of this. I hold my hands up and go, it's not the fault of the kid. It's the fault of the system producing it. Because
if you view it as the fault of the system that's producing it, it's because your cultural priorities are something else other than what those individuals occupying those positions of influence happen to have. He would like to see critical thinking developed. That's just simply not a priority of the people occupying these institutions.
It's just one kid being produced who can't argue, can't think critically. You can go, well, the kid wasn't listening, or maybe they weren't a good student, or whatever it may be. But the fact that we're producing legions of people who can't think critically, that's not the people's fault who are getting produced. It's the fault of the system. And what we need actually is a radical overhaul.
And it's also the fault of the adults who won't contend with them or allow them to be contended with for fear of the emotional damage, or they won't be able to handle it, even when we're talking about college students who are adults.
The adults that enable those individuals to retreat into their emotions, they do that because it helps ensure those individuals stay as useful idiots. Critical thinking is obviously a higher order cognitive function, and people that think critically are far less inclined towards acceptance of propaganda, the same propaganda that would demoralize them into accepting ideas and practices that are not actually beneficial to them. So if you can allow a person to excuse their behavior with their emotions, then they're absolved of any need to examine the logical processes that they were reacting so negatively to. Effectively, it ensures that they never have to contend with the cognitive dissonance that happens from attempting to reconcile, what information you've received up to that point with this new information that conflicts with it in some way. And naturally, all three at this table and myself would agree that that's supposed to be part of the growth process as a person becomes more cognitively capable. And yes, it's going to be frustrating and difficult, and you're not going to find it the most emotionally pleasing thing to do, but it's part of the process to produce an individual that has risen above mere base concerns. They're not just a slave to their emotions. But again, all of these general ideas promoting a better human being, this is a cultural priority. And in order to make sure systems are enforcing this, you would need cultural hegemony that has been long lost to the left's march through the institutions and the importation of groups that do not set that as a cultural priority at all.
Well, that's why I was asking you about why college administrators cave to this stuff, right? Because I think within that there is...
They don't cave to it. It is useful for the perpetuation of their ideology. Their ways are not your ways. Their priorities are not your priorities. By their fruit ye shall know them. Their fruit is a bunch of adults, young adults, that do not think well about anything, and that's by intent. We make the mistake of assuming that it's just like a dereliction of duty and they're not doing their job. They're doing their job, but the purpose that they're engineering is not one that you would understand. Effectively, one of the worst problems I see people that are generally aligned make when watching the outcomes of leftist behavior is putting upon them your beliefs of what is supposed to be the outcome, instead of interpreting it through the lens of what would they be working for. It's an entirely different psychology from what you're used to.
actually power that they don't realize they have, because those are also teachable moments, right? When a bunch of kids demand some kind of readjustment of the entire system, if you have strong leadership in that moment, that community...
Demanding strong readjustment of the entire system is directly within keeping of leftist ideologies. So to repeat, they've accomplished exactly what it is they set out to accomplish. Leftists want to collapse existing institutions because it would potentially increase their social standing. They want to be the ones at the top of the power hierarchy.
Indicates that that is not how this works. That can teach those kids something. And I think there's been an abdication of responsibility on the part of the adults, I think, which is what Francis is trying to get in that way as well.
It's only an abdication of responsibility by the adults if you assume that the adults share the same cultural values as the men at the table. If those adults believed that their job was to produce critical thinkers that could in turn potentially stray from their ideology, then yes, that would be an abdication of responsibility. But that's not the purpose of these individuals that are nothing more than cogs in the leftist machine that occupy these positions of influence within institutions. I think it's important that people realize that us versus them is real. Their understanding of what they're trying to engineer is not the same as yours, and they are in fact diametrically opposed.
Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. It goes back to that. I just can't stop thinking about this example with Sam Richards and how there's this fear of all of these problems are going to have so many variables, though. There's the variable of liability. Well, it's being streamed on YouTube. Okay, well, let's take that off the table. What about the classrooms where it's not being streamed on YouTube or being shared? Is that occurring? I'm sure it must be happening. I haven't seen it personally. It doesn't mean it's not happening, but I think I agree with you. It's safe to say that the majority of cases, it's not being fostered.
And it's also as well, not only do we not encourage kids and young people to think critically, we also fetishize emotions. So if you're having a debate and you say something that I profoundly disagree with, or you criticize a point and I get offended because I hold that point dear, suddenly it becomes acceptable to be offended or angry or upset, and I'm the one in the right and you're the one in the wrong.
That is promoted because it ensures that they stay within the ideological framework that they've been demoralized with. It's not anything to do with whether the behavior is logically correct or conducive to a better civilization. View it through the lens of a Machiavellian. Because of control of the institutions, you're able to produce a certain kind of individual. That kind of individual acts in a way that's in accordance with your ideology. If you can get them to resist attempts at changing them from their current belief system, such as emotion being a valid excuse for why you don't need to examine your position more thoroughly, then it's assuring that person stays a useful idiot for your cause. It's an important tool for leftists.
Yeah, that's how it gets weaponized. I was just thinking about probably the next video I do is looking back at you talking to Alex O'Connor, I think, and he was trying to make the case as though hate speech laws are justifiable, well, because we have libel laws or defamation laws. So can't you imagine, Constantine, a case in which you are actually causing emotional distress or harm to someone because of this medical condition? I mean, and I think you handled that well. You were kind of like, just like, what are you? They're just two completely different things. But so I thought it just reminded me of that. I thought that was interesting.
I agree with you. I'm great. Going in.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the video there. It is an interesting video. I understand completely the point they're trying to make, and it's a beautiful point in that you would prefer that principles come before tribalism, that you would have this collection of individuals that would stand on principle before they would begin to have consideration of the tribe. And it is a beautifully Western civilization concept. You probably find its roots in, for example, Christian martyrs. So there is certainly a beauty in it. But it becomes one of those cases where you have the beauty of the idea versus simply surviving. And humans are going to look towards the need of basic survival first, more often than not. Because the overwhelming majority of people are not going to want to potentially die to stand on principle. Well, that survival necessitates collectivizing, so the tribalism is what comes about. One of the points of contention that they really kicked back and forth was that how you would treat a leftist for doing the same thing somebody on the right would do is somehow in violation of principle. I do not remain convinced that that is the case at all. You can stand on a principle, but also adjust how you engage with individuals based on the circumstances, whatever particular issue that was brought about that is in violation of said principle. You can choose to use context to still stand on your principle, whatever that may be. I am of the belief that, of course, I am going to react more strongly to any group that I believe is working against my best interests, because I am going to, for good reason, assume that if they are doing it because it is harmful to either me or my side in some way. Whereas if somebody that's an ally of me is doing the same thing, I'm not assuming they're trying to harm the whole. They might be misguided, misled, just simply wrong, and that's okay. You debate with them. There might still be a disagreement at the end. But when all is said and done, you're going to understand that's still your ally. They're still going to be the one in the trench with you. It's not going to be the other side. So, the other issue they brought up is some things related to the education of people and them not being, they're not developing critical thinking skills. Again, that's a reflection of Gramsci's long march through the institutions. They're producing the exact kind of people that are most useful to leftists. Somebody that is engaged in critical thinking is going to appreciate nuance enough that they're inevitably going to have strong disagreements on certain areas, and those strong disagreements are always a liability for Machiavellians. Think of it this way. Would you rather have a person that agrees with you unthinkingly and goes along with you all the time, or would you rather have somebody that aggressively disagrees with you because their beliefs differ? Now, in the exchange, in the spirit of Western civilization, we would actually make the case that we would like that person that strongly disagrees with us, because that testing of ideas will result in, either greater understanding or perhaps superior solutions. But that's a cultural value. But it's also not conducive to your elevation in the social hierarchy. If it turns out your ideas are inferior, you're going to take a step down. And you have to be okay with the prospect of your social standing taking a hit. Leftists are not tolerant of the idea of being even further down the social hierarchy. They are, after all, always playing zero-sum games for power, and they want people to continue to elevate their standing. Earlier, for example, they mentioned defending your brand. It takes a certain kind of set of cultural values and a willingness to accept stepping off of your pedestal that would come with showing perhaps that you've learned or adjusted your positions on any specific topic. You're not allowing yourself to ossify into this sort of archetype that people have put up on this pedestal. You're not really going to find much similarity with people on the left. They're going to be far more predisposed to being that archetype, and because that gives them power, they're going to do their best to sustain it or find a way to drive it forward. So it's effectively a competing clash of cultural ideals. Do you want a spirit or culture of people like at this table? One in which you have a more fluid cultural exchange, where there's vehement disagreements. You might go up, you might go down, but in the end, you're standing for your principles and what you believe in. Or would you rather have a system in which people are going to be critically thinking less because the institutions do not want to turn out people that are disagreeing with them? Other than that, unfortunately, I actually had to record this video twice. Somehow I had an audio issue with the first one, and I actually preferred my reaction much more in the first, but is what it is. But I'll say the same thing. Give your support to Trigonometry and Warren Smith. They've appeared in other videos of mine. If you happen to like anything I said, like, comment, subscribe. Have a good day.